All right, everybody, we are going to start our second session for our seminar this afternoon. And so we want to invite you guys to come on up, grab a seat. This is going to be more, from what I'm aware of, more dialogical, more interactive. So make yourself ready for a conversation. Come sit closer up, and we're going to engage with Clayton this afternoon. So come on up, and we'll get started. Clayton, I'm going to hand it off to you. You can say a prayer. And
I'll start it out. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, so do we have this slide? I'll wait for that. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's a long day, but I appreciate that. So I have a couple questions. If you guys, I'm hoping you have some questions or that you'll have some input, but if you don't, I'll have a couple questions to engage in some dialogue here. There we go. All right. Great. I'm giving everybody a chance to settle. Kona, how about you settle up here, Bubs? Thanks. All right, so we're going to start with just a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the nourishment to our bodies in the terms of food, and I pray that the time that we share together here will also be nourishing to our soul. And we thank you for your love and your goodness in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so my thought here for this time is that really I want to spend the majority of the time around understanding this slide, okay? Because it's got a lot going on there, and so I want to just take time to somewhat break it down, understand what it's explaining, how it's happening in our body, because really what we were talking about this morning, I want to try to at least let our minds understand a little bit about what's happening physiologically, because I think that gives us just another tool to be able to speak to ourselves in a kind and compassionate way, because that's what we need in order to shift any kind of traumatic experience out of its stuck area, okay? So I'm going to turn this way because it's actually a lot easier for me to see it up here than it is to look here. So what this chart is looking at is it's talking about our autonomic nervous system, okay? And the autonomic nervous system is the series of nerves throughout our body that basically has functions of either exciting or sending impulses to us to activate our bodies, or sending impulses to actually regulate our bodies and to calm. And so historically, most scientists believed that our autonomic nervous system was binary, meaning that it was like a light switch where it was just either on or it was off, okay? And so the input that will activate the autonomic nervous system is what we know as stress. So this chart is indicating like where stressors influence our life and how our body responds to that, okay? And so before, like I said, when it was just this understanding that it was just on or off, there was the idea that you either just had stress or you didn't. And so all the stress coping mechanisms were then formulated around like, well, we just need to de-stress. You know, we need to find ways to just kind of get rid of it. But the understanding now is it's a little bit more complex than that, because what was found through different research is that you can have an elevated amount of stress that's actually a positive thing, that actually can motivate us. If you've ever heard or seen a chart on like the stress response curve, it's like you don't want too little stress and you don't want too much stress. You actually just need just enough to stay motivated and to be engaged. And so there's a little amount of stress that's actually can be a positive thing. But what they've also found is that once you get to a certain level of stress, the heightened amount, then your body actually kicks on the down-regulating system, but it doesn't bring you back into like a rest and digest kind of state. It actually pushes you into shutdown where you're preparing to die. And so it's got some interesting capabilities there, the body does, and so I'll try to explain that a little bit more as we put these pieces together. Okay, so the autonomic nervous system is made up of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And I'm sure you guys have heard these terms before, but I just want to see if we can, bring in some more information that gives us some more tools to understand ourselves. So the parasympathetic nervous system is the side that is active when it is engaged when we are shutting down. So that's why it's referred to as rest and digest. Because it's where our body needs to be if we are going to rest. It's where our body needs to be if we're going to be digesting food. That's why we sit down. That's why we, aren't running around when we're eating. The sympathetic nervous system is the side that responds to some kind of a threat, whether it's real or perceived. It kicks on, it floods our body with stress hormones like adrenaline. And like I said, this doesn't necessarily have to be a negative thing. If you were going to play basketball this afternoon or this evening, you would likely get your sympathetic nervous system engaged because it would really activate you. What it does is it pushes all these stress hormones, but it also pumps blood to the rest of your muscles in your body so that you can be strong and you can respond to whatever energy level you need to be at. Okay, your heart rate starts increasing, oxygen pumps to your blood, to your muscles. An example of the sympathetic nervous system activating that would be in a threat response could be, let's just say you're eating dinner at a favorite restaurant and suddenly you have this flash of hot air roar across your face and the whole room fills with smoke and you hear people screaming fire and you hear the alarms. Your body then is just automatically thrust into sympathetic mode, okay? And your body is pumped to move, to flee, or to fight, and before you even have a conscious thought, you are already reacting. And that's the amazing thing about the way that our threat system works is that it cuts out every unnecessary function in your body. Like you don't need to think in a moment when you're faced with immediate danger. You usually just need to get out, either to fight or you need to run. And so I can't remember the amount of time but it's like a fraction of a second for the amygdala, brainstem, sympathetic nervous system to engage, and boom, you're gone. Okay? And so that is really good. That is really great design that God has made when we are in an actual threat, an actual real danger situation. But the problem is that our brains don't know how to differentiate between physical and emotional threat. And so when we then enter into an emotional threatening situation where maybe all of a sudden our loved one's face changes and you can tell that they're aggravated with us and they're about to unleash some kind of fury on you, your brain reacts in the same way. It reacts in like there's a hot fire that's just rushing across my face and I need to run, and that's the impulse is like I got to get away, But if it's your spouse and running away is not going to help you, so you've learned to stick it out, and it's like, okay, I'm going to take my punishment. But you have to fight something in your body. There's a certain amount of conflict that you have internally in that sense. And so that's how our sympathetic system works. And when we look down here, so for the parasympathetic side, you have two branches. You have basically the vagal nerve, the vagus nerve, which is where this theory comes from, polyvagal theory, is just the longest cranial nerve in your body. So it connects to your brain, goes throughout your body, and it connects to it has systems that connect to different organ systems, which is why we're talking about sympathetic and parasympathetic and how we're talking about digestion, because when you're in a sympathetic mode and you're in fight or flight, because your body cuts down all the other systems that are unnecessary, you don't need to be, digesting your food while you're running away from some kind of a threat. You have to channel all that energy into just surviving. Then that's why these nerves connect to all the rest of the different organ systems. So So down here on the green section, that is a part of the ventral vagal system, part of our parasympathetic of our autonomic nervous system. Okay, so this is where it's responsible for social engagement, and where we feel when that system is activated, it's where we want to connect with others. It's where we feel comfortable, relaxed. We want to engage socially with others. And as we have this curve right here I wish I had a pointer, thank you. As we have this curve going up, that is representing an activation of our sympathetic. So it's like a stress input is what that curve is representing. So as the stress is increasing, the arousal is increasing, we again are activated to either fight or flee. And you can see these little arrows here, like on the left side. Let me see if I think my pointer on my other one will work, actually. These arrows in the yellow. There we go. Right there. This is still in an activated state where we're in a stressful state, but we still believe that we have a chance. There's still an amount of hope. Like, I'm going to continue to fight. I'm going to continue to run. And I can still survive. But as the stress increases, because normally, like I said, we should be able to move between like negative emotions and positive, right? And so as stress increases, and then it should be able to come back down when we have learned proper and healthy stress coping tools. But if it continues to increase, you'll see that we get into this orange section here. And now what the message that our body's starting to tell ourselves is that I can't. Somehow we feel like we can't move from that situation, and that will continue to push us in to a different state of our nervous system. And this is interesting because our brains do this automatically. But it's based upon whether or not we feel like we have options or not. As soon as we feel like we've run out of options, like maybe we're in conflict with somebody and we've tried to resolve it and they're not willing to listen, or they don't have the emotional maturity to be able to have a conversation with you, and you keep trying to engage, and you can't feel like you can set a boundary or go away, then this is where it starts to push into the I can't. And we oftentimes will freeze. And this is what happens there, is that you had the sympathetic nervous system activated, but now the parasympathetic acts like a brake, whereas the sympathetic is gas. And then it starts to like force us into a shutdown. So interestingly enough, that parasympathetic system is what is the ventral vagal is part of. The dorsal vagal is also part of the parasympathetic, but you can see that here. Nerves here, parasympathetic here, but it's a different experience that we have. Like, we don't have a restful experience up here. We actually start to have a decrease in heart rate and blood pressure and muscle tone, but it's a negative experience. It's one where we actually still feel the stress, whereas this one is the stress goes away. Does that make sense? So I want to spend a little time on this because I feel like it's like really, it's a little bit, it's a lot to take in. But so if we continue to move on, the stress continues to increase, the body starts to feel, have sensations of being trapped or feeling like we're helpless, or we just start to check out, and this can happen in a lot of different situations. It could be, at home, it could be at work, or in some kind of social context. And if somebody gets too far on this curve here, this is where we start to see a lot of mental health disorders, where there's a lot of dissociative thoughts, where you feel disconnected from your body, and it's going to be a place where relationships are going to be almost impossible to sustain, and at some point in this level here, no amount of conversation or even therapy, in terms of like talk therapy, is going to be helpful for that individual. But the one thing that does always work, that has been shown to work when somebody is in this state, is to have somebody just be there with them. Just sit and have zero words and says, you know what, I'm here with you. You're safe with me. You don't have to be anything about where you're at right now. And I'm available. And it's interesting because it's almost like our nervous system, and this is the way our bodies are wired, but it's almost like our nervous system can help regulate somebody else's nervous system simply by being there, simply by touching them and being there. And this is what I think that it's like, you don't have to have, a degree in social science to be an effective co-regulator, or crisis, manager or conflict manager. You can have very simple understanding, but just that you have the power to assist when somebody's going through a crisis just by being there. I think that's fascinating. The only other thing that I want to point out in this is that when somebody is here, and this is oftentimes where people all of a sudden take notice, because oftentimes when we ignore the signs our body is giving us here, we get here pretty quick. And up here is when all of a sudden socially somebody can say, hey, is everything okay? Even though they've been going through a lot of turmoil for a long time, once they get to that point, now it's more visible. And so we notice, we say, hey, is everything all right? What I want to point out is that when that happens, in order to get from here to here, where do you have to go through? You got to go through the sympathetic nervous system to get back down into regulation. So what I mean by that, what I want to point out is that if you are trying to help somebody, or maybe if you feel like you're in this shutdown state, the news is not great, but it's just that it's going to get worse before it gets better. Does that make sense? So somebody is usually going to have to go through some turmoil, because the only way you get from here to here, if you've been here for a long time in the dorsal vagal shutdown, is there's going to have to be some really serious processing of negative thought patterns and that story like we were talking about this morning. And that story is going to have to change, and that can be a difficult thing to go through. And it can bring up a lot of emotional reactivity. Sometimes in the therapy world, when you see somebody start to heal, they actually will go back to like poor coping mechanisms. There's one story that I listened to recently where this guy was working with a client, and they just had some powerful breakthroughs in understanding themselves a little bit more. And the person came back the next week. They're like, I don't know what you're doing to me, but I haven't had a drink in 10 years, and I went home and I got drunk last week. And most people was like, oh no, I'm doing the wrong thing. But this therapist is very keen, and he goes, that's great. He's like, I can work with that. He's like, you're now being honest with how you're really feeling. Because when you get up into the dorsal vagal shutdown, no longer have you been honest with where you're at. You're almost like giving up. Like I can't even cope with, I can't even begin to cope with where I'm at. And so if you're talking to somebody, just understand, if you start to see behaviors that feel like it's backtracking, sometimes that means that they're actually moving down into the social engagement and actually down-regulating, which is a good thing, right? So when we look at this being our nervous system, okay, and the stress and how our body responds to it, then when we see this, next slide, if I can get it to go. This is, obviously a very, not a very official medical slide, but it's showing like the way that the nerves weave throughout our entire body. We can see how trauma or something stuck can manifest itself in different areas of the body, because it's lodged in our nervous system, which means, and those nerves are connected to our muscles and they're connected to our organs. And so this is where we can start to have symptoms that start to come out, and maybe they have to be with, like gut issues, or maybe they have to do with muscle tightness, or, like chronic tension that we just can't reduce with stretching. So there's there's all sorts of connections, that can happen, and they can all tie back to these emotional traumas, which I think is profound, and it's the reason why I want to continue to dig into these ideas and understanding, the depths of emotions and the depths of trauma, because I find that I can trace almost every physical ailment back to our emotional intelligence and our emotional health. And as a sleep technician, I thought that sleep was that magic connector to all these different ailments, because in many ways it is, where if somebody has some kind of physical ailment, you can almost always trace it back to the quality of their sleep. But what I realized after years is that the quality of their sleep is actually connected to their emotional health as well. And so anyhow, we're just going to the depths here of what, how our body functions. One last slide. Oops, what happened? Andi Colbert, in this book, Try Softer, she writes, in a quite literal way, the ramifications of not living in tune with ourselves is that we are less able to connect to the experiences of others. And so just like I was talking about this morning, like on that slide we just saw on the polyvagal theory, the less we understand about where we are at on that graph, the less we're going to understand or be able to connect to the way that people are also struggling in that way as well. So this is why it's a reason for us to really dig into where we are at as in our own selves. So that was the only thing I wanted to present tonight or this afternoon, and then I want to hear from you and just kind of like what's been coming up for you as you've been listening this morning and this afternoon. I have my email up here just in case you have any like specific questions, or you wanted some of the slides, or you wanted that book reference sheet that I mentioned earlier. Go ahead and email me, and then I'm happy to to send you over whatever you're looking for. All right. I don't know if we're going to use a microphone, but I'm curious. I want to hear what's coming up for you guys as you're listening. Where are your thoughts at? What do you feel like stood out to you the most? What was meaningful? Good. Everything. I'm interested to hear more. Like, I think that I think we're all here. This is a small group, and we're here kind of because there's shared interest in the topic, and so hopefully this would be kind of a safe space to be able to just share if you want to be something personal, or maybe like what's kind of drawn you to this topic. Maybe we'll start with that question.
I have a mic for whoever wants to speak. So.
I think for me, what I found very interesting is, I've been going to therapy now since I was 14, and I've seen so many different therapists, and it hasn't been until like this last year that I found out that you can fire your therapist and get a new one. And really,
that is good to know. You need to know that, yes.
Because and it was funny how like my therapist was like, well, if we're not connecting, then I'm not helping you. And I'm in the business of helping people. So finding a recommendation and the fact that you can see multiple therapists at the same time, I didn't think that was possible either.
Yeah.
Because, I have different issues, and one therapist isn't going to help the other issue. But one thing that struck me, what you were saying about trauma, is one of the therapists I'd seen was like, well, how are you dealing with your trauma? And I was like, I've had a couple of traumatic experiences, but like, I don't really have trauma. And they're like, yeah, you do. I'm like, no, I don't think so. Like, I have life. Life has happened.
Yeah.
And the way you described, like, it's not just one big gash, but all these little paper cuts that just keep happening. I'm like, that's me.
Yeah.
That just blew my mind. and I have a lot to talk to my therapist now.
Yes. Awesome. Mission accomplished. Yeah. No, I mean, you're exactly right. I think that, everybody has been touched by it, touched by trauma. And the less that we are aware of it, the more it grows and controls us. And that's why, like, when we can at least have, like, just even a sliver of shift, in our minds that says, oh, that wasn't okay. Like when you're talking about that's life, that's how we kind of generalize it so that it's manageable for us, but the reality is that God has so much more, than that, as I see it anyway. It's like He has so much more for us than just to kind of accept that this is like okay, like it's like, oh no, I can go. Our horizon can expand, and what's possible. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing it.
I think what stood out for me was the large trauma versus small trauma. Because, if you have, like you said, if you have a bullet wound, you can't just put a Band-Aid on it. You got to go to the emergency room, and that's an instant fix. Like you're going to go see someone right away. Where if you've got a splinter, that splinter could cause an infection and could fester for a long time because you don't realize it. And then it could go as far as like losing a limb because of a small splinter. Yeah. So that small little trauma could be a lot longer lasting than your large traumas. So I mean, it was the point that really stood out.
Hey, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah. No, I have a real example of that too. Actually, Kona. So my second son, he's 9. I think he was like 5 or 6, and he never liked me to clean him up after he had a fall or crash. So I don't know if he crashed while he was running or on his bike, but he had this rock, that was stuck. It's like a little teeny tiny pebble that was stuck in his finger. And so I was like, Kona, let me help you. And then he's like, no. And so anyhow, we couldn't deal with it at the time. I had forgotten about it, and come to find out, I don't know, it was months later or a few weeks later, I don't remember, but the skin had grown over it, and it kept growing until he had this giant bump, with the rock that was stuck in there, and he had to have it minor surgery, where they just they numb the area and they cut it open, and that then he had this huge hole there, in his finger, and it was just this, exactly what you're talking about, this illustration of it's wow, when we don't deal with the little things, right away, it's they can become worse than they would have been originally, until we act, and then we have to, deal with it and heal. But thankfully we can. Now his finger's fine after he got it removed. So, yeah. A couple more.
We wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about EFT.
Yes. So emotion-focused therapy is it's a form of therapy where you have to get to the lowest core emotion that is driving whatever kind of conflict. So EFT talks about this universal cycle, infinity loop, where usually you start with some sort of content around an argument. It's just hey, I told you to take out the trash. You didn't take out the trash. You never take out the trash. And how you have this story that you're telling yourself around that emotion that you have. You're frustrated. Talking to your partner. And then that frustration is born in you never, it's always got some other kind of idea or truth that we believe. And then your behavior is that you berate your partner. And then your partner, what they hear is dang it, I messed up again. I'm never good enough. I can never measure up. This person is impossible. And you have all these thoughts then that start going in your mind, and your behavior is isolation, withdrawal, or maybe it's attacking, and then that triggers in them, this person will never hear me. They'll never, you know what I mean? And so then it's just constantly like this. And so EFT is about moving below that and saying, wow, when I ask you to take out the trash and you don't do it, maybe I feel scared that I don't have a voice in this relationship, or that somehow you don't respect me, and you talk to the person and when you communicate that fact, the deepest core need that you have, I really have a need to be heard because maybe this goes back to my childhood, and my parents never listened to me, and I never had a voice, and it really triggers, and all of a sudden it's like a trailhead to like these all deeper issues that you have that could be individual, but they're surfacing in your relationship. But when you're here, it's about getting to the vulnerable level, and when you can have the vulnerable conversations, now all of a sudden there's something inside of us that is wired to connect with compassion. Like when we see vulnerability, we naturally want to console and be compassionate. But until we get there, which it takes a certain amount of introspection, then it's hard for our partner to really meet our needs. But when we do, then it's like, oh man, I'm really sorry that happened to you as a child, and I'm sorry that I'm, creating that atmosphere here. And so, how can, how can I meet your need? You know what I mean? Like, or how can I respond in a different way? And, because like maybe when you start to talk to me in a, accusatory way, I hear this voice that I'm not good enough. Now you're being vulnerable. And all of a sudden you're having this conversation that is like super connecting and is like, well, I never saw my partner like that before. That's the core of EFT. And this is where like EFT actually works off this premise that basic couples therapy was just about, you just need to learn how to communicate better. Like you need to learn how to use I statements instead of you statements and things like that. And those things can be good in some context, but oftentimes it's like communication, if you don't know what you need to communicate, doesn't really matter. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't matter how good your communication is if you don't understand what you need to communicate. And so that's where EFT was like, well, we need to go deeper. And there's been tons of studies on it. It's been the most successful couples therapy model. So it's what I hope to get training in anyway as a therapist. So. But I've gone through like several of Dr. Sue Johnson's books, and she's the creator of it. And then Carol and I have actually gone to like a workshop. They have like couples workshops based on EFT, and it's really powerful. Like if you have a weekend to invest in that, it's and the financial investment, it's like $1,000 I think, but it's like deep and heavy, and you'll talk about things that you never thought you would ever talk about in your relationship. It's pretty good. So, does that answer your question? Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. The first one goes back to the story of your son and the finger. And what happens when you have children in your home or in a classroom? I'm thinking classroom students, kids, kindergartners up, who have that happen, only it's not a stone that you can see. It's the gazillion, even as a kindergartner, slashes that have happened. And it does grow into a huge thing where you have to have surgery to get it out. But it's an emotional surgery. How do you help those kids?
That's a great question, and I think that from a teacher perspective, and needing to manage a whole classroom, I mean, I would say that you would hopefully have a dedicated counselor on staff, to be able to like say, hey, we need somebody to come in. So I mean, because that's like, I mean, as a teacher, that's like, unless you have the ability to connect with that student one-on-one, or maybe even be speaking to the parents and like, hey, I've noticed that, this individual's behavior is different or progressively getting more, whether it's violent or aggressive or just unreachable, then it's like, being able to have that conversation with the parents would be helpful. If you can connect with the individual child and try to meet the need, in some way of just like letting them be an outlet of like, hey, I'm here, like, let's play together, like, or something. I don't know if that, would fit your context of what you're talking about, but that would be ideal.
It would be ideal to have a counselor in every school.
Yeah.
But it's unreal.
Yeah.
So my other one is more personal.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing you talk about sleep disorders and sleep studies that you've done and how connected it is. My husband has severe RLS, and he's had it for the last good 20 years, and it's gotten worse.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how that plays into everything that you're talking about, because you said they're connected, and that makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's nothing you can do about RLS. He's on a tremendous amount of medication. I don't know if it helps or not, but the RLS keeps him up, and he doesn't get much more than 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. So that's my other question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. For those who don't know, RLS is restless leg syndrome. That is like a nervous system, connected disorder. But I would say that, well, several things. It could be physical, like there can be like iron deficiencies that can cause that. And so I don't know if, if he's on any kind of iron supplements, but the medications, and this is like the catch-22 of sleep, is that the medications that manage that type of disorder actually disrupt your sleep even further. And that's true of almost all medications, that they actually inhibit REM, rapid eye movement sleep, which is the most restorative for your nervous system. Which is this is where you have to find a way to to wean off if possible. But I would say, two things recommendation-wise would just be, I don't know if has he seen a sleep specialist?
Oh,
Plenty, many, yeah, okay. So that's step one. Step two, I don't know, has he seen or is he open to seeing a therapist? Has he talked to anybody? He has, okay. And he is, okay. And that's really, those are the best case scenarios, unless he feels like he's not getting any kind of productive, movement with his therapist, if he's not, like Alden says, connecting with them, because people can drag therapy on for a really long time if they're not in a good, connected space, So, but yeah, that's really tough. I just think that the emotional health and wounding definitely plays a part, in that ability for the nervous system to just calm. And so the more that he can really focus in on that, is he a faith-based? Is he a believer? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
He is, and he's currently seeing the specialist at the University in Nashville, whose name I'm forgetting right now. Anyway, he's the chair of the Sleep Disorders School of Sleep Disorders,
Wow.
basically,
Okay.
and has written a textbook or two on RLS, and has played many different scenarios with medication, and it gets better, and then it gets worse. And he's been seeing a very good therapist, and the same way, it gets better and it gets worse. And my concern is at this point in his life, we're both going to turn 70 in a year.
Okay.
Is this all there is left for me? Is this what my life is going to be made of from now on?
Yeah.
So that's my biggest fear, and I've been really listening closely, and a lot of the dynamics that you've talked about are happening, within his life, and he's doing everything he can to fix it. Well,
and that's the best place that he can be, it sounds like. And it's, I would just say that, if he wants to try like a different therapist, like an emotion-focused therapist, or something that's more specialized maybe in the past trauma that he's had, that might be a helpful thing. If there's any kind of hint of spiritual trauma, someone like Pastor Troy, talking with somebody who can really sorry, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I just think that's, he's got a good grid for that in terms of being able to create a healthier picture of God, can be powerful. I actually just heard a quote, an Ellen White quote, that she was talking about how that religion, in a healthy picture of it, can be one of the strongest nervous system regulators. I can't remember the exact words that she used, but it was really powerful. So that can play a part in it too. These ideas that we have about God that can be misguided. So, but yeah, that's a challenging case. But thank you for sharing it with us. Yeah.
So I just wanted to comment on the first thing that you were talking about. In some of my reading, also on the polyvagal theory, they were talking about the greatest indicators for success between therapist and client. And the conclusions of this particular study that I read said that the biggest indicator of a successful therapeutic relationship was the client's sense of openness within the therapist. So if there was a sense of safety, connection, and this person is fully available and open to me, then the the success rates were much higher in those therapeutic relationships.
I like that.
That was encouraging for me because it's like I don't have to be an expert to help somebody heal, right? But also it requires the person that's the listener, the therapeutic individual, to have an openness within themselves, which requires you to have integration. So when it comes to like kids, right, in the schools and stuff, the biggest thing that you and your staff can ever offer is that they are open to the students for whatever it is that they need to share. And being willing to, I don't know, just be a consistent presence in their life.
Yes.
It's like good relationships replace bad relational experiences. And I think that's what we have the opportunity to do in schools and churches and stuff, is create new good relationships. So.
Like that, yes, absolutely. Thank you.
See if I can do the microphone. So a couple of things really struck me. So that graph you just had up, working with the VA, we've actually gone through what's called PMDB training.
I'm familiar with that.
And I don't remember what it stands for. The government likes their acronyms.
Yeah.
But it uses the same graph in dealing with our veterans in, trying to help to de-escalate them so that, we have a safer environment. But I've never thought of applying it into my own life, and as to where I'm at, and the thought of being up at that top spot for who knows how many years, and the fact that the emotions, you have to go through to come back down. And that's the scary part. It makes you want to just stay up there.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that the big trauma and little trauma. I've had both big and little, and I think the little traumas, the daily paper cuts, are what has done more damage than the big traumas.
Yes. Oh, that's definitely true. And I would say, Jessica, definitely you reaching out to somebody. Don't do it alone is what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? Because that's actually the number one indicator of somebody being able to move through the different nervous system states is the sensation of safety, the feeling of safety. And so it's like, yeah, if you can have that safe individual to go through it with, that's the best place to be.
Hi, Clayton. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah.
As a person who probably spent a great deal of time in that red area, I was wondering if you have any ideas for when I've noticed I experience triggers sometimes, and I would like to know if there's any tools for, not getting sucked into that, being in that red area again.
Yeah, there are, it kind of depends, I guess, in terms of specifics, in terms of what the triggers are and where they're coming from. So without, going into too much detail in your specific case, I think that being able to take an isolated incident and say, what was the activating point? Where did I shift, from having enough awareness anyway, from yellow to red, and then knowing okay, if you can isolate the emotion and in that situation, because some people, in their triggers, it might be something around shame, or it might be something around fear, and depending on what emotion you identify, use that as a trailhead. Use that as something that can dig into well, why would I feel shame about, somebody maybe insinuating that I'm just using a random one that's common, my intelligence or something like that. You know what I mean? Why would I feel an insult and shame towards that? And it's it's because of, how nobody ever believed me whenever I said something, or I felt like I had to fight for my voice when I was younger, things like that, and then I think to me, when you can dig deeper, then it just gives you more of an awareness of why you might be in the state that you're in, which that awareness alone, to me, allows you to be with yourself. And if you can be with yourself and say, oh, yeah, that was a past, message that I heard that I wasn't enough or whatever, but now I know that I am. And you can kind of bring God into that experience and say, I'm just going to sit here with this sense of shame, and I'm just going to be with God, and God's going to tell me how much I'm valuable, and those messages are old and don't need to be there. So that would be kind of like a conceptual way that I feel like, would be helpful. I don't know if that answers your question, but because you can look up there's coping lists, you can look up coping skills, online, and some of them may be helpful for some, but they're not going to be helpful for everyone because, like I said, it depends on where that, where that trigger is coming from. What's feeding it? That would be my question. Does that make sense? You want to add anything to that, Pastor Troy? Pastor Troy is a really, really deep guy, by the way. We have some great conversations in the men's group.
On coping strategies?
Yeah, I don't know, just things that you've seen have been helpful, when you were doing the chaplaincy and stuff.
Yeah, I think so. What I was gonna comment on is, the need for integration, for each individual. And I think, when you go through a trauma cycle where something happens to you, it leaves a scar, an emotional wound that resides somewhere in your soul somewhere. And something happens in your life that brings that back to the surface. To get integration, that emotion attached to this experience has to be validated and experienced more fully for you to integrate that experience into your life and move on. And so I think what is needed when a trigger happens is for you to, what you were talking about, get the emotion straight. What is this thing? What's this internalization that I have?
Yeah.
A lot of the times it's what's the narrative driven by this emotion, or driving this emotion, I should say.
Yeah.
And then you're able to feel it. And something that I read once that I thought was super powerful, but a grief that's never seen or witnessed is never really grieved. So suffering silently or grieving silently or mourning silently over something that has wounded you, unless it's visibly seen in the presence of other people, it's not actually grieved, right? So this is where the connection part comes into play. It's when we can come and be present with other people and they with us, and we can feel the things that have hurt us most deeply, and then be reminded by those same people that those things that wounded us aren't true, and there's a better truth for us, then all of a sudden we can find freedom, and healing and stuff like that.
Amen. I agree.
And I've experienced that in microcosms, and I'm looking for that all the time.
Yes.
I think we all should.
Yeah. Exactly. No, that's been my experience as well. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Could you just say that again? The last part of it.
The grief part.
Yeah.
So a grief that's never been witnessed by other people is never really grieved. Because to grieve something silently inside yourself, it's kind of like this black hole that you have this emotion world that's somewhere, we don't know where black holes are or where they take stuff to, but there's this world that's just sucked away from our actual integrated life, in which lives sadness, sorrow, pain, whatever it is that lives in there. And unless it's brought out and other people can see it, and they can experience that emotion and empathize with you and sympathize with you, then it's just there. It's eating away at you forever, right? So to come in a Christian community or some kind of safe therapeutic community and have other people see the things that have imprinted you so deeply, and then validate that those things aren't true, and that those things that hold so much power over creating shame cycles in your life and depression cycles or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
You can break out of those with this community coming around and supporting you through that. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's so true. Yeah, definitely. That's one of the things that Brene Brown, a researcher on shame, talks about. It's shame can't live in the environment of empathy. It's the one thing that keeps things deep-seated emotions like shame are which oftentimes accompany things like grief. Are just silence and isolation. They just breed that, those feelings even more. So to talk about them, to be in a safe space, it's the number one way to.
And just to like throw the whole faith element into this, when we often think about repentance and confession, it's often like approached as like behavioral modification practices, like Christian behavioral modification. Like I have to go through this practice of repenting from my sin, which in some Christianese way is like I have to right the wrongs for all the bad things I did, right? And then confession is I have to tell everybody all the bad things I did in order to correct the bad behaviors that I participated in or whatever. But the reality is what confession is. It's a way to be authentic with your life and your feelings in the presence of other people. And repentance is about mind change. Literally in the Greek, it means to change, a change of mind. So it's to have your psyche shifted in the presence of a confessional environment with other people where they get to witness those things that have hurt you and other people the most deeply. So, yeah.
No, that's great. I love it.
I'm talking too much.
No, it's good. Linda, did you have something? Sorry. I saw your hand. Oh, got it. Good.
Oh, did you get it? Grief that's not observed is not really grieved.
Did you have something?
So I know you talked on emotional maturity a little bit, and I've found that in the work that I'm now currently doing, a lot of times the people that I work with have a lot more mental barriers than others, and as they are able to mature into that emotional maturity, they're able to easier communicate what's going on with them because they don't really understand. And we work with clients over a long period of time sometimes, and the longer you work with them, the better, the more mature they become, and then they're able to communicate like, hey, I have this going on, and they don't really understand what caused that at first. And so there can be this frustration and anger, and you get people lashing out, and I think it really helps to just keep talking and keep pursuing the person, because a lot of times it takes a lot of time and patience. So
yeah, definitely. No, it's great. I mean, because it's like, I think the natural knee-jerk reaction is to, when we don't have emotional maturity, is to judge ourselves as being bad, and our thoughts as being bad. And so it's like, when you can have somebody sitting there across from you saying like, I'm okay with you, and you can be okay with you too. I think it's so powerful. It just totally shifts somebody's mental state. It's good.
A little off topic, what you've been discussing, but what are your thoughts on EMDR?
So EMDR, from what I've looked at anyway, it's really powerful. Under the guidance of a trained therapist, it's shown to be extremely clinically effective. And I know Christians who are able to do EMDR, because I know there's a certain amount of fear there in the certain faith communities, about is it kind of hypnosis or brainwashing or anything like that. But no, as far as I understand it, I don't have a lot of knowledge on it, but I'm just saying basically what I've heard others who I trust say, that it's highly effective, and you still have all your mental faculties as you're going through it, and can just be another way to kind of move these stuck thought patterns, to kind of shift into a healthier and more positive, cycle. So, yeah. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it's just a way to, again, like we were talking about, the neurons that fire together, wire together. It's about if those are in an unhealthy, ingrained pattern, to be able to get out of those, have the neurons reconnect in newer and healthier ways, which our brains are supposed to do naturally. We're supposed to learn new information, for our entire life. And we're supposed to be able to, prune connections that don't need to be there. That happens naturally in our childhood, but sometimes we can get stuck, and so we need assistance in that, and that's what EMDR is for. So.
can I ask a question real quick? And then, so I have a question from a pastoral perspective, and I'm not saying that I saw this today or anything like that, so I don't want you to hypothesize anything. But I feel like there is this judgment against this pathway towards healing and abundant life and stuff, where there's a group of people that are like, well, faith alone can overcome your past. You know what I mean? And some people just check out to stuff like this because they're like, well, this is just pseudo psychology. This is just, new self-help,
right.
narratives and stuff like that. So then, how do we approach that with people who are like, I call it spiritual denial. I want to put the past behind me because I never want to look at it, but God will help me move forward and, that kind of stuff.
Man, that's a really great question. I mean, that's really something that I think about a lot, because I notice that I feel anxious when I'm presenting in a faith community because of that. I'm already bracing for that, I wish I had some really good comebacks because I think some people do. But you know what I mean? But I guess I generally go back to where it's we don't do that with our physical health. You know what I mean? We don't pray away our ailments. Some places do, right? But they can be getting themselves in some sticky positions. But we don't pray away, our broken leg or our, our diabetes or anything like that. There's physical steps that we have to take. And so I think that to me, when we understand that the brain is a part of our body, and as Adventists, I mean, we totally believe in this integrated model of our, our body, mind, body, and spirit, and in the sense that they all affect one another. It's I feel like it's it makes sense. So I don't know. I try to rationalize with somebody like that, but I'm sure there's probably better ways to do it. Actually, so there's this one ministry called the Life Model Group, and it's by Dr. Jim Wilder and Michael Hendricks, and I just read a book recently called The Other Half of Church, and it was just about how when we're dealing with doctrine, and some people really like that, we're only speaking to one side of the mind, we're only speaking to the left brain, and so the missing component is that relational component. And when we can create access pathways to the relational side, which I think for everybody, for those individuals, it might be just connecting with them, you know what I mean? And I'm happy to see you, and I'm glad you're here. And I think it starts to activate this part of the mind, even though they may be resistant to it. And then pretty soon, I feel like once you have gained somebody's trust who is more left brain thinker, they're actually really attached to you at that point because they probably had nobody ever connect with them like that because they're so offensive in terms of just off-putting. I don't know. That's just my hunch, is that these people really just need some deep love and connection, intimate, relational connection anyway.
So I feel like you spoke to this a couple of weeks ago. Yes, in one of your sermons about you're talking about small groups, and you said there was a lady there that just kind of going through the motions. Which I think a lot of times as Christians we go through the motions. And we're just doing it because that's what we've always done, and to have that, you're constantly in these conversations in these small groups, and it's more intimate, and then to have an aha moment, So I think that might be where we can kind of tie that in is, by having those small groups and having more intimate conversations with a smaller amount of people, and then they'll, hopefully someone will have that aha moment in their life so that they're like, oh, this is important, and this is going to help me heal or move beyond my trauma. So.
It's interesting you asked that question, though, because there's a book that I am just purchasing right now. It's called The Pandora Problem, and it addresses really that question. It's about those who are resistant, to even just building a more relational style of church and that how to reach. So I'll let you know.
Yeah, my comeback though, you want to hear it?
Yeah, let me hear it.
Well, it's a line from this guy Pete Scazzaro, and he said you can't be spiritually mature and emotionally immature.
Yeah.
Because Christianity is the language of love.
Yes. Yeah.
And so to talk about emotional maturity, it's like, okay, well, you can't be like some theologian guru and somehow have no friends.
Right.
You
Right.
know, it just
Yes.
doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Exactly. No, you're exactly right. Yeah.
Well, Grant, I wanted to say I'm glad one person listens to my sermons.
Not true. Not true. Anybody else? Awesome.
Oh, Jose's got his hand
Jose.
up.
Yeah.
No?
Not a hand up.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Well, if that's it, then I really appreciate you guys being here and listening and engaging. That's the most meaningful thing for me, is that I can really hear, like how it impacts people and where people are at, because it helps me to grow. And yeah, if hopefully we can have more conversations around these topics, and whether it's in small groups or whether it's one-on-one or whatever. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me, call me, catch me in the at church sometime. So awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you. Appreciate it. The book list, yes. I can email it. Yes, I will. Awesome. Thank you guys. Let's. You want to close this time in prayer? Let's close it in prayer. All right. Let's do it. I can pray. Yeah. God, we are so grateful that your Spirit has moved today and in our hearts, and I pray that it would continue to speak to our spirit, and that we would feel life and joy, and we would be able to look at ourselves differently and look at our intimate partners differently and our families differently. And I just pray that you would continue to spread love in this community. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, guys.